French New Wave was a pivotal turning point in cinema. It rebelled against a medium that became stale and bland, injecting a vibrancy and charisma that had previously never been seen before in art. The French New Wave is essentially a rebellion against the classical formula of film, originating in the post-war France of the 50s, pioneered by the Young Turks, a group of 4 film reviewers for the magazine Cahiers du Cinéma. The Young Turks, most notably Jean-Luc Godard, had a habit of attacking the most artistically respected French filmmaker of the day. Writing criticism didn't satisfy these young men, no matter how much they attacked the stale medium of film. They sensed no change in the medium. By the end of the decade, the Turks began making their own movies with borrowed money, unrestricted by the rules and regulations of studio environments and the rules and regulations of the publishers. Thus began the French New Wave. The New Wave sought to redefine film. The Young Turks believed that film no longer represented the angst and existentialism that the post-war generation was defined by. For them, film represented a false idealism, an art form undamaged by the horrors of the war. The pioneers of the New Wave chose to completely reinvigorate the technical and narrative aspects of their films, rejecting the tried and true methods of films previous, using techniques that were previously unused and shunned by their predecessors. Some would say that these abstract techniques are representative of the Young Turks and the generation they spoke for, imperfect and damaged, disillusioned by the idealism of the medium. The environment and social climate of the 50s Paris also played a major role in the New Wave. Budget restraints and technical restrictions were reflected upon in the film of the Turks. Films were shot on location in the grime and dirt of the streets, rather than extravagant studios. Cameras were cheap in hand held due to budget restrictions. Actors and subjects within the films were close friends to the directors, as hiring actors was too expensive. All these little characteristics and technical choices culminate in the style utterly unique to the French New Wave. Perhaps the most notable figure from the New Wave is Jean-Luc Godard, a visionary in the medium both nationally and internationally. Admired for his inventive and unique approach to cinema, his works resonated with a generation of bittered and jaded individuals. This essay will not only be a study into the characteristics of the French New Wave films, but also an in-depth study of the films of Jean-Luc Godard, his existentialist views and unique visual aesthetic, and whether or not he can be considered an auteur. In this video essay, I will be comparing and contrasting 3 of his works, namely 1960's Breathless, 1963's Le Petit Soldat, and 1962's My Life to Live, to identify any recurring motifs and thematic styles that solidify Godard as an auteur. But first, what is an auteur? According to Francois Truffaut, a true film auteur is someone who brings something genuinely personal to a subject, instead of producing a tasteful, accurate, but lifeless rendering of the original material. This essentially means a filmmaker who has full creative control over his or her work, controlling all aspects of the film that make it so. This ranges across everything: the cinematography, the editing, the direction, the mise en scene. Every aspect should be tightly controlled by the director in order for them to be considered an auteur. Breathless is considered Godard's magnus opus, not only for his first feature film, but his first response or attack against the medium. The film deals with existentialism and love and betrayal in a refreshing light, compared to similar films drenched with a film noir-esque style, and characters who are representative of the bridge between the Hollywood film scene and the traditional French film scene. To identify recurring themes throughout Godard's work, we first need to identify them, and what better place to start than his first feature film, Breathless. Let's start by explaining the synopsis of the film. The narrative revolves around Michael, a criminal and a murderer who is obsessed with the film persona of Humphrey Bogart. Michael murders a policeman on a country road and is subsequently hunted by the police. Michael, penniless and wanted, turns to an American paper seller for security. The ambivalent Patricia unwittingly hides him in her apartment as he simultaneously tries to seduce her and call in a loan to fund their escape to Italy. Patricia says she is pregnant, probably with Michael's child. She learns that Michael is on the run when questioned by the police. Eventually she betrays him, but before the police arrive, she tells Michael what she has done. He accepts his fate and awaits the police. He steps out into the street to greet them, but is shot. He runs down the street stumbling, but falls, dies breathless and alone. The entire film is drenched in cynicism and existential metaphors and symbolism. Almost every scene has an element of this theme, but for the sake of convenience, I'll pick out a few key scenes that truly embody this motif. During this scene, we can clearly see that Patricia is romantically interested in Michael. He is a perfect opposite to her personality. Patricia is adventurous and competent, respectful, but ultimately she is frightened by the world around her. Michael, on the other hand, is an amateur anarchist, jaded and disillusioned by the society and culture around him. This easily represents the context of the New Wave, especially Godard's personal ideologies and beliefs regarding the state of cultural decay him and his generation found themselves in. However, Patricia isn't truly in love with Michael. She is in love with the aura of mysteriousness around him, his power as a character. But she knew that this power doesn't correspond to the society in which she planned to live and succeed in. She learned to love Michael's dedication to an unknown alternative to the reality they both known, but ultimately couldn't make herself fall for this alternative. The film opens with a static close of Michael staring out to the street, signalling his accomplice out of shot. His expression is completely uncaring. He appears to be almost bored by the crime he knows he is about to commit. In this scene, Michael is the embodiment of the cultural mindset of Godard and his peers. He is almost an alien in the pseudo-happiness, quietly observing the oblivious and content around him. Michael's particular gesture of, as if zipping up his mouth, is a sign of refusing to talk in the way that befits the time. Unimportant personal achievements desperately exaggerated by the people, refusing to notice and address the crippling existential dread the war forced upon the people of France, blindly living their life as though nothing bad had happened. Michael's gesture of zipping his mouth shut is a subtle yet rebellious action. The final scene of the film involves Michael's final stand, the acceptance of his inevitable fate. Although agreeing to come peacefully, he is shot regardlessly. He stumbles down the street clutching his gunshot wound. Bleeding and broken, he falls to the ground. Though wounded, Michael is not trying to run away from the police or resist. Michael is running somewhere in the direction of his uncertain existentialist dream. Whilst the scene is rather distressing, at its essence it can be considered a love letter to Godard's generation. Though wounded and broken, they continue to follow their uncertain dreams. With no set destination or plan, the people still rebel against the conformity and denial of the post-war years, and this to Godard is beautiful. The final shot of the film is also worth mentioning. The camera pans down to Michael's face on the floor, writhing in agony and pain. He looks up at the camera and mimics Patricia's facial expressions from earlier in the bedroom scene. This is Godard essentially laughing in the face of death, a final existential mockery before slipping into death. A commentary on how the people of post-war France succumb to greed to consume pleasure provided by society, in exchange for obedience, a polite and happy smile though fake, in order to retain the normality of their lives. Similarly to Breathless, My Life to Live explores the concept of existentialism, but this time coupled with the theory of high determinism. The theory that even before we are born, our path and actions throughout life are predetermined, meaning that we have no free will. We are born and we die in a predetermined way. As in the New Wave way, there are many unconventional techniques used in the creation of My Life to Live. Filmed on the streets of Paris, it is sometimes possible to see non-actors looking at the camera, as if they are being drawn to the star, Anna Karenina. Long takes are prevalent, and according to an interview with Godard, were often accomplished in the first take. If retakes were necessary, it was no good, he was quoted as saying. The storytelling method played with the film form. It is not simple A to B narrative, pieces are missing, and it is impossible to fill them given the information provided in the film. The camera moves to follow the action. If it is possible not to have an edit, that is usually the decision made. Many existential and philosophical questions raised, some answered, some not. But the film and director begin to question life and cinema itself. The fourth wall is broken to a haunting effect. It is a rebellious piece that often plays with story structure and film technique, like many of the New Wave films. Likely done for both practical and artistic reasons, My Life to Live could be described as an avant-garde quite easily and correctly. We're introduced to Nana, a girl who craves fame and wealth so badly that she is willing to prostitute herself, and we track her through her descent into despair. The film, broken up into 13 chapters designed to take you out of and limit your engagement with the film, highlights the absurdity of Nana's existence. Nana is a mother, yet we never see a child or maternal moment. Nana is poor, yet lives carefree. She is a prostitute, yet even she is turned down by a client. The mental toll this takes on her causes her to defiantly state in a cafe that she is herself and in total control, demonstrating by moving her body parts. Yet not long after this, Nana is sold like she was a plaything and killed in the resulting struggle. She lived, she tried, she died. Everything within this film relates directly to existentialism and the context of the New Wave. Just as we did for Breathless, we will analyse the key scenes that show us the reoccurring motifs of existentialism. The scene starts with a static shot of Nana, with Nana located in the bottom left section of the frame. The camera angle and Nana's positioning creates the impression that Nana is no longer vital to the story, and by extension, her world. If not even the frame in the film focuses on her, what chance does she have to be anything more than another body in the crowd? What is my purpose, she seems to ask herself, a classic existentialist question. Nana begins a dialogue with the philosopher out of shot. The two start to converse and discuss the novel, The Three Musketeers. The philosopher tells Nana a story about a character within the book, Porthos. The philosopher tells Nana that the second Porthos started to think, he was dead. This can easily be applied to Nana herself. Before her attempt to change, her life was content. She lived a life without fearing the possibility of failure. Godard is essentially saying that with change comes a fall. Even though she was brave enough to rebel against her conformity, she was destined to die. Another interpretation of the scene again analyses the dialogue between the two. We reach this point in the movie right after Nana watches Dry's 1928 The Passion of Joan of Arc. The raw emotion and existential metaphors within leave a visible impact upon Nana. She challenges herself to create her own philosophy of life. However, upon meeting the philosopher, her beliefs have been reduced to nothing. Her attempt at forging a new way of life for herself, a new beginning, has been lost. She has no identity, no meaning. It's at this point you can say that she has truly fallen. God's intention with this could be a metaphor for how his generation were often punished for attempting to forge themselves any meaning of the society. Anything that wasn't the norm or controllable was shunned by the society. Nana's loss for words in this scene is exactly what Godard experienced himself. Another scene that clearly expresses Nana's existential mindset, and therefore Godard's, is the Passion of Joan of Arc scene. Narratively, very little happens. All the scene features is a shot from the movie, followed by the words "the death." However, the emotional power of this profoundly silent scene deeply affects Nana. The camera cuts to a close-up of Nana. Tears stream down her face. The light from the cinema screen reflects off her tears, darting back and forth across the screen. This unbroken close-up of Nana's face tells us everything we need to know about her. Just like Joan of Arc, Nana wishes to fight and die a martyr, to have purpose in her life, just as Joan had. However, unlike Joan, Nana has nothing to fight for. Her tears aren't in response to the movie she is watching, but a deep and existential sadness, a sadness that could only be created from the sudden realization that you have nothing worth fighting for. It is my belief that Godard intended this to be a self-reflection of himself, rather than his generation. These tears are too specific, too raw and emotional to simply be a broad commentary on his times. Le Petit Soldat was Godard's second feature film, shot and released within the same year as Breathless. Just as radical and controversial as the first, the film was met with a storm of controversy, not only due to the film's now infamous torture scene, but also due to its politically charged narrative. This film has its existentialism rooted so deeply within it that picking only 2 or 3 scenes and analysing them won't show how crucial this motif is to the story. Instead, I will be analysing characters and their actions through the film, rather than specific scenes. Bruno is the film's main protagonist. He's an agent of a right-wing terrorist group who are locked in a battle with a counter-far-left terrorist group. He eventually meets Veronica, an agent of the far left. Bruno is a young man with a developed internal world and personal opinions and ideology. On his own, he is able to act according to his personal ideals, not according to orders and expectations of his political bosses. Bruno often looks at the viewers without asking for advice or help nor pity. Gaze is already acknowledging that he is trapped within the confines of his political master's grasp. Without dialogue, we can still clearly see that he is desperate for a way out of this lifestyle. Godard wants to get at the bottom of Bruno's failure as a human being. Is this failure that of the very revolutionary aspirations of the Western youth? Bruno yearns for freedom to resist the society he finds himself trapped in, but he is controlled by very developed manipulative strategies his society are equipped with. Under a political establishment with a mighty arsenal of seducing, corrupting and intimidating tools, and now it is much more difficult than in older times to resist, Bruno is obviously aware of this, yet still seeks an escape. From this, we can clearly see a link between Bruno and his political ideology. His anger at the established government and his hatred for conformity mirrors Godard and his generation. Just as Godard craves so much to rebel against the conformity and blind obedience of his society, so does Bruno. We can also see the world itself as an exaggeration of 50s Paris. Those with more defined and personal ideologies and opinions were shunned or forced to conform to the established way of thinking. The far right and the far left terror groups are just an extension of 50s French government. No matter what point on the political spectrum you fall under, right or left, they are all the same, failing to meet the needs of the new generation. Veronica is Bruno's equal in every way, just as disillusioned and jaded as him. They feel that they are equally trapped by their political affiliations, but they see it as a problem of their individual intellect. They loathe the fact that they are disillusioned by their realisation of the world around, how corrupt and imperfect it is, and they somehow feel ashamed to share it with one another. They are like a brother and sister separated by a political divide, and they unconsciously try to mask this fact of being existential equals by romanticising their attraction to a point of obscenity. The torture scene also houses deep existential and philosophical meaning in it. Whilst the actions on screen are violent and distressing, the message behind it is just as upsetting. Bruno, up until this point, has been devising a way to escape from the political world he has created for himself. Before he can fully commit to this plan, he is captured and tortured brutally. What this stands for, however, is more than an abuse of a prisoner, it is the destruction of freedom itself. It is a reflection on the social political climate of the 60s. Godard exaggerates how those with a difference of opinion, those who wish to challenge the structure of the government, those who wish to question the ideologies of those in control were crushed. The existential search for a new identity, one different to the norm in his society, was oppressed and shunned. Although not literally tortured, Godard felt that he and his generation was. What made Godard this bitter and existential? Why does his films rely so heavily on visual and metaphorical use of existentialism? You could say that it was simply due to the cultural and social environment he was molded by, but it goes with saying that existentialism is a key recurring theme throughout all his films. From the doomed existence of Michael in Breathless, the lack of free will within My Life to Live, and the destruction of individual identity in Le Petit Soldat. Without a doubt, Jean-Luc Godard is an author, a master of his class, and a true spokesperson for his generation and beliefs.